Hey, it's Jeremy from jeremy.net. So, I've got a little project that I've been working on, and if you're following my newsletter or following me on social media, then maybe you've seen some of these images before. But I'm doing some Morningstar work. Usually, I do a lot of work on my lunch break at work, and obviously I don't have my setup to film there, so I have some stuff I'm working on that I haven't been recording. So I figured instead of not being able to show it to you, I could just show you the sketchbooks and kind of talk you through what I've been working on. So I have 3 different sketchbooks here. And the purpose for these sketchbooks is that late last year, I went to the Fantastic Workshop that's put on by the guys who do the One Fantastic Week show. And I got some really good feedback on my art setup in general and kind of the thrust of my whole work, because I've got a few different comics that I'm doing. I've also got art prints. And the main feedback was that I wasn't really branding myself in terms of what is the main thing I do. And I had to look at, well, how do I want to approach that? Because I do a lot of different creative things. And the approach I decided to take was that I was going to make my booth Morningstar centric, since that's the big comic book I'm working on right now. And when Morningstar is done, then I'll design a new banner for whatever my new project is. And I'll treat it almost as if kind of like whatever album a band is touring behind is going to be my dominant image. So I decided, all right, I want to find a new strong image to build around Morningstar. And I actually was thinking about redesigning my book cover anyway. So I thought, why don't I make it a twofer and design a new image that's going to be a new cover for Morningstar Volume 1 and also double as the artwork for my convention banner. So the first sketchbook was just thumbnails. It's just me kind of sketching and doodling. And, it's a regular, what does this say? They're all the same size. 5.5 by 8.5 sketchbook. So they're all the same size, but this one's just a normal sketchbook I use for thumbnailing. This sketchbook is a toned paper sketchbook, and I was using this to do value studies. And then this sketchbook is a mixed media sketchbook. It's a Strathmore mixed media sketchbook. The paper is a little bit thicker, but it's pretty similar to Bristol board, so we can take a variety of medias, and I'm using this one for color studies. So the idea is work out the ideas and the concept, do some value studies, then do some small color thumbnails before I go and do the final piece. And to be honest, I still haven't decided yet whether I want to do it in traditional, paint it in acrylics, which I haven't used in a long time, or do it digital. And to be honest, knowing myself, whichever one I choose, I'm probably going to do both just to see what the difference is. I'm only going to do one right away to try and get it done in time for WonderCon. But if I do traditional, I'll probably still do a digital painting later on just to compare. If I do digital, I'll probably do a traditional painting later on to compare. I still haven't decided which, but I'm going to have to decide pretty soon because I'm almost done with my color studies. So the first thing we'll start with the thumbnails. And my main thing I was thinking of was I wanted it to be more of a portrait, a little bit more intimate close-up shot of Morningstar. Really, not too different from the cover of issue 1, but I wanted you to be able to read his features more. And to be honest, it was important that you could tell that Lucifer is black in this version of the story, because when I'm at conventions, a lot of people have responded very positively to having characters of color in a comic book. I'm black, and I don't think that my comics necessarily have to be Afrocentric, but I like to have black characters in the stories I'm doing just so they're there and they're present. And that, I thought, the version of Lucifer that's on the current trade paperback, it's very, very dark, and his eyes are glowing, and he's so shadowed that you can't tell whether he's a person of color or whether he's just a demon that is a dark-skinned, it's less about his ethnicity on the cover than it is just a dark, menacing figure. And I wanted to actually make it more of a portrait of an African-American character. So when I started with the thumbnail, I started really just working with sort of a close-up shot, and I kind of drew a few different faces that I was thinking of, just look at some reference online, sketched out some ideas for what was going to be in the background. And also for some reason, I thought the idea of, I didn't know if I was going to be able to work his horse in there or not, or have a horse in the background, but I liked the idea of his horse having an upside-down cross on its face. And I had an interesting conversation with someone a potential business conversation with someone who they were kind of put off by the fact that this was a book about Lucifer because they were a person who had strong Christian values. And I thought it was interesting. It never occurred to me that someone might think that I was a Satanist or had satanic tendencies because I'm doing a book about Lucifer. I mean, he definitely doesn't come off as the hero in this book. If anything, it's about the downfall of a character who should have been a hero. But it was really interesting for me to consider that. And I don't know what other people think of it because I don't run across a lot of Satanists. But it was interesting for the first time I thought about how the work I created was being reflected, how it reflected on me. So, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if anybody else thinks that. If you guys are like, wow, he's not a Satan worshiper? Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you're surprised, maybe you're not. But I'm not. Anyway, a few different thumbnails. This one's kind of suffers from the same problem as the first cover in the fact that it's so dark that you can't really tell much about his features. This was me just sort of doing a portrait of him. And this feels a lot more the way he does in the comic. And I really like the look of this, of one eye in shadow and having that twinkling glow. But I feel that distracted from the portrait. So, I don't know. I may end up working that in. I may experiment with adding that digitally at the end, regardless of what form I do. Like looking at it with a little bit of a twinkle in one eye, kind of a red glowing twinkle in one eye versus not. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about it. But anyway, I started looking at this and thinking this gave me a better sense of what I want his face to look like as a portrait. And then I started playing with composition. And as you know, this is the big thing. I sit around doing thumbnails all the time compositionally. And I was thinking, well, do I want to have something with his arms just sort of down at one side? And the first thing I keyed in on was in the cover of the current trade paperback, Lucifer is spinning a lasso. But that lasso is turning into a flaming pentagram at the top. And I thought it was a really cool image, kind of mixing the Western themes with, you know, the symbology of Lucifer. And when I was thinking about this new cover as a portrait, I decided to kind of take the imagery of saints and a lot of Byzantine artwork where they have the head is framed by a halo, sometimes with a cross in it, but taking that same idea of having a pentagram around him. And I think that was one of the things when I talked to that person who was sort of put off by my work, where I realized I really am kind of pushing buttons here. And it's not me trying to be controversial for controversial's sake. It's more like I'm trying to do work that's kind of thought-provoking and a little bit disturbing. So the idea of intentionally perverting the imagery of saint paintings and saint imagery, it's got a dark power to it. And I'm not trying to do it for shock value. I'm trying to, I guess if anything, create a sense of true foreboding. When you see something that's sort of done repurposing or appropriating holy image for an unholy figure, it's, you know, that it's really hard to define when you're trying to shock someone, but you're not trying to shock someone for shock's sake. You really want it to be, that's really all I can say is I was going for something disturbing and unsettling, not because of a titillation factor, but because this story is supposed to be disturbing and unsettling. So that imagery I kind of settled on early on. And then just working in different ideas of whether it was going to be a very, very dark black background. Like I was already started getting into values, just saying like, but the problem with doing one that's super dark is that it immediately goes back to the problem I had before where Lucifer is very much in shadow and you lose the sense of the African features. And I wanted to be more of a portrait. So I kind of messed around with a few different poses. And the main thing I got to sort of towards the end was the idea of one that was cropped maybe a little bit below the chest, with Lucifer standing close, kind of just brandishing a gun, and his head surrounded by this pentagram halo. One that was sort of like maybe cropped closer to knee height. And then this one is probably pretty similar to the other one, but the other thing I was thinking was just sort of one, oh yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. One that's really, really close, like it's cropped at his chest, one cropped at waist height, and I did a couple of different sketches of one cropped at kind of at the knees, almost like a almost a full shot, you know. But just messing with the lighting a little bit. One where the background's completely black and it's almost like he's in moonlight, and then one that has more of the sky lit up with the pentagram. And that's where I realized, once I got to these two, I kind of knew that it was going to be something sort of closer to this. But then that's when I already knew, all right, I'm going to definitely have to move to value studies when I'm done with that. So I think I did like one more, and just sort of working out, trying to block his silhouette against a background that was more lit up by the fire. So I was like, all right, there's the possibility of doing a background that's completely black, and Lucifer and the flames are sort of lit on top of that, like they're lighter on top of that, his body lighter, and then the pentagram being the lightest thing. And saying, all right, I'm just going to work through a couple of variations so I find a lighting that I like. So those were just all the thumbnails that I did just for figuring out this piece alone. Then I decided to do a value study for each of the different compositions. This was both a chance for me to work on Lucifer's face and expression a little bit more, to work on the pose a little bit more, while working on a couple of variations in the lighting. So this first one, it ends before you get to his knees, but with his waist being up here, this is sort of like the farthest out shot that I was planning to do. Well, actually, you know what? Let me double check, make sure there isn't. Yeah, that's the farthest one out. Now, I like this shot, and it gives you a full sense of the story. You can very clearly see his wings, the pentagram, and I chose to go with the very, very dark background, and then the very light, and then all of the midtones would be sort of where Lucifer is, with his jacket really dropping off into the darkness and his clothing dropping off into the darkness below. I like it, but I said, all right, let me see what happens if I get a little bit more intimate. So the next one I made was one where cropped probably about waist height. And so we're just pulling in tighter. Each one of these is pretty much the same composition. His pose is the same with the gun. The lighting is the same, just for a chance for me to experiment with it. But this one's pulled in a little bit tighter. And I knew for the last one, there would be a big change in the composition because I was going to have his gun now below the title. So this really is a very intimate portrait of his face. But the problem I knew was that you lose a lot of the story. You lose that iconography of the halo around his head, the pentagram halo. You lose the iconography of his wings. It's just, you know, a brother in a cowboy hat, which is cool, but it doesn't convey all the other things that are in the story. And I posted all of these online, kind of asking people's opinion. And overwhelmingly, the response I got was that this middle one was the best execution of it, because it gave you a nice sense of a portrait. I mean, I would definitely get in there so you can see his eyes. I didn't really make much detail in there in this version, but I'm going to light his face so that you can see a little bit more of his eyes, even though they're slightly in shadow underneath the hat. But it's definitely better lit than the what's on the current trade paperback and what was on version 1 of the very first issue of Morningstar. So this is what I went through for my value studies. This is the one that I decided to go with. Now, once I had this, then I started going to color studies. So sketchbook 1, sketchbook 2. Here in the color studies, let's see, how many did I do? Oh, really, this is the only one. I guess, so we're pretty much caught up here because I haven't had a chance to get much further than this page. And I did these in watercolor, which is a small watercolor palette I have, and a water brush. And I was thinking about the potential of having the background be very, very dark blues, and then having Lucifer be warm, and then having the pentagram behind him, the halo, be hot, having it be white, yellow, and orange, then having Lucifer go into browns and reds, kind of like cooler but still warm colors, then having the background be cool. So I just played with a couple of these. The second one is me just trying to let a little bit more of the light from the background bleed over onto him. And I'm probably gonna do another couple of versions to play out with this a little bit more. Now when I got into here, I was trying to think just in terms of abstractly, what happens if I have it just the background is completely black, and then I really focus on warm behind him and then blue of the figure. And that led me to these two different studies, because I was trying to think, you know, if you've got a warm light source, then the general logic is warm light, cool shadows, cool light, warm shadows. So I thought, well, I don't want to make something that doesn't work conceptually, visually, but what would happen if I start with just saying, all right, here's Lucifer and he's cool, and then I paint in warm on top of him? And what happens if I do Lucifer as warm and then paint cool into him? So I think I'm probably going to end up making these backgrounds completely black. So it's almost like this, where I say it's black and then just having Lucifer mostly warm, and then painting, you know, on this one, Lucifer being warm and then painting cool shadows into him. And on this one, Lucifer being cool and then painting warm lights onto him. Now, in the end, I realized what makes the most sense is simply the light is warm, make everything facing the light also warm, make everything facing away from the light cool. So that's another option that I'm going to play with. I'm going to work through these color studies so I get something that feels logical, rational, makes sense, and looks attractive. So it's not necessarily like I want to break the laws of color theory or expect to discover, break new ground. This is more of a tool because I don't work as much with color. You know, my comics are black and white. So whenever I'm doing a color piece, I try to think through it a little bit more. So this is just sort of my thought process on paper. I could use just having the spare time to do color studies of other artists just for my own education, just picking like 10 different old masters or illustrators like Mead Schaefer. I've looked at some of his work and I like a lot of his colors, which tend to be really muted anyway. But looking at some like illustrators of the past and doing color studies of their work just to kind of understand how they used color and work it into my own. But yeah, that's what I've been working on lately. So hopefully I will have a new banner done in time for WonderCon. It's putting me a little bit behind because I'd almost done thumbnailing Morningstar issue 7. And I thought, oh, well, I'm getting far enough ahead. I had this idea I'd been wanting to do this banner anyway. And I started realizing, well, I'm getting closer and closer to the time. If I'm going to have a new banner for a trade show, I better get started doing it now, so I'm not pushing it up to the very last minute. So I want to get that done, get that off to the printers, and hopefully it'll look fantastic. And then I can get back to cranking away and hopefully wrapping up issue 7 and moving on to issue 8. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these videos, please like and share them. Don't forget to click the subscribe button. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter to get a free digital comic at newsletter.jeremy.net. That's newsletter.gerimi.net. Also, visit my main website, jeremy.net, where you can buy my comic books, art prints, and more. There's also links to my Instagram, Twitter, and other social media accounts. That's it for now. Go be creative.